I thought the finale of Samurai Jack was horrendous. What an unmitigated garbage fire. What an atrocious end to an otherwise mostly good series. Now, skimming the net, I'm actually surprised at the mostly positive reception this ending received. So hey, if listening to somebody rip this episode to shreds isn't your idea of a good time, this may not be the video for you. Nobody can say I wasn't hoping for the best. I mean, I ended my review of the penultimate episode by saying, "So I really hope the conclusion can just blow us all away." I guess this episode did blow me away in that I was blown away by the sheer level of bad this finale was. Practically every single aspect of this concluding episode was downright awful. At the end of the previous episode, I was excited because there seemed to be so many possibilities for how Samurai Jack could potentially end. And yet, we get the most utterly predictable cliché schlock. Such a basic, bland, and boring way to put an end to everything. And the pacing, the terrible pacing of all the events. I will go as far as to call the finale the antithesis of what Samurai Jack usually is. Samurai Jack is a show that has meticulous attention to small details with a pulse-like pacing. The finale had none of this. None of the magic, none of the tension, none of the intricacy that made the show feel so alive and unique. In a weird yin-yang type of deal, my only defense of the pacing is that at least it took less time to get through that awful mess of a finale. It's actually quite possible if these exact same events were extended out over 2 or 3 episodes, I may have enjoyed sitting through the experience far less because the events themselves were still garbage. That doesn't mean the pacing wasn't terrible and super rushed, it just means if something is really bad, at least it was gotten over with quickly. That's legit my only defense of this episode. At least the bad went by fast. I think that's enough preamble. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of all the complaints I have. First and foremost, the opening section where everybody is waiting for Aku to deliver the broadcast should have been completely scrapped. What a useless 2 minutes. In an episode where everything flies by at breakneck speed, I'm astonished they decided to give the entirely pointless introduction segment this much time. What I think should have happened is the new intro for Season 5 should have been scrapped as well, and the episode should have began at the 3-minute mark. It should have began with this scene.
Long ago in a distant land.
If the episode kicked right off with the classic intro, but with everyone watching it on TV across the world, that would have been such an awesome callback and opening hook. Imagine how surprised you'd be if this was the very first thing you saw as the episode began. Instead, I think the drawn-out focus on the past cameos that ultimately achieves nothing serves to spoil the impact of this intro rather than to hype it up. The exact same information would have been conveyed by just showing the people watching the original show's intro, that everybody who has hope in Jack is now witnessing the samurai had been captured, that Aku is trying to crush the last remnants of hope in what he sees as his world. We really did not need the 2 minutes of showing characters being worried ahead of time. Aku's way of modifying the classic intro isn't even done in an interesting way, he just pops up and goes, "Not!" Looks like Aku and Borat went to the same humor coach to learn comedy. By the time we see Jack captured, the episode was already feeling very off. The stakes aren't there, I'm not particularly fearing for Jack's life like I should be, things are just kind of awkward and not meshing together well. While Aku tries to decide on a weapon, and Jack whispers the most generic choice of words to Aku Modashi, the pacing is super clunky and stumbling over itself. I feel like this lanky, awkward walk of Ashi's represents the whole episode really well. Clunky, weird, off-putting, tensionless, etc.
Please, Ashi, fight! Fight!
Wow, Jack, you wanna be any less emotionally invested in this? These plain words and this tepid delivery are the best you've got at this crucial moment? This scene does not deserve the dramatic music that plays. There's a disconnect between the quality of the music and the quality of the script and directing that just made me shake my head in disappointment. There was zero tension of any kind to be had, no matter how much the soundtrack wanted to insist otherwise. Then, the hell is this? The people watching the television in various parts of the world now attack the base and free Jack? What? Was Aku choosing what weapon to kill Jack with for hours and hours? Or considering all the various characters that appear, For days, more like? How does this make any sense? Why would anybody write this? I'm reminded of the wonderful third episode of the original series, where half of the episode is spent detailing the extent of the preparation it took for Jack to face a Scarab army. Now fast forward to this finale, where forces from across the entire world arrive impromptu to Aku's fortress in apparently just a couple minutes somehow. Why would you make it this way? It's as if all these characters and callbacks were crammed in for the purpose of fan service in the hope that it would distract from how terribly conceived and crafted this moment was.
Flying monkeys? No, jump good.
Yeah, people love the jump good line, but for me, using all these characters in this way had the opposite effect. It was disrespectful, I guess would be the best word. There's no proper setup, no coherent timeline, the action isn't even good, and Aku is just standing there completely still like a brick doing absolutely nothing. This sort of fanservice isn't fun when it feels half-assed and the villain is literally sandbagging the various factions so they can get their attacks off. It's so limp, so frivolous, so disappointing. Aku mode Ashi vs Jack round 2 doesn't feel like anything special. I also laughed when Ashi keeps trying to pierce Jack, and then when she finally gets a hit in, she uses blunt force instead to not slice through his torso. If you're gonna show Ashi struggling for control, perhaps now would have been a decent time, showcasing how she's managing to at least exert enough of her will to prevent blows that would cause death to the person she loves, apparently, I guess, you know? When Aku finally decides to fight, he turns the allied forces into an army of mini Akus, which feels like it was done yet again to keep Aku standing mostly still, doing nothing. Can't have him turn into a giant ball and just steamroll everyone like we've seen before. That would make too much sense. Instead, we need enemies that slowly dwindle the numbers down. Which, by the way, none of the characters dying had me really caring. When Aku squashed them into mini versions of himself was the only moment that was at least a tiny bit traumatic, mostly because he turned them against their former allies, but just the failure of the pacing and the complete lack of proper setup made these characters feel like fodder, and emotional investment doesn't usually form for characters that act as fodder. Which, by the way, Jack undoes their entire existence anyway, so their lives retroactively matter even less. The Scotsman arrives late to the party by a few minutes because, well, I guess it just seems like a very transparent and feeble attempt to make the narrative more interesting if he's late.
Then how?
Celtic magic.
Yeah, that line was pretty good the first time you used it.
Celtic magic.
But repeating it yet again in the exact same way doesn't have the same impact. The gag with him naming all his daughters was pretty funny, but then him telling Jack to take his pick was just gross. Hey friend, we haven't seen each other in ages and the fate of the world is at stake, but pick which one of my daughters you wanna fuck. Screw off with that cringy garbage. I almost feel like they needed a way for Jack to mention to the Scotsman that he was in love with Ashi, so this joke could happen.
I don't think she's your type, lad.
And the Scotsman being despicable regarding his daughters was the only way to get to it. Not worth it. So yeah, Aku gets serious finally, kills some more peeps, Ghost Scotsman is like ridiculously powerful, and Jack gets Ashi to gain complete control of her Aku powers by...
Ashi! I love you!
Really? Really? I rolled my eyes so fucking hard at this scene. Seriously, the literal power of love saves the day? Is that the reason Jack's dialogue sucked so bad and all he was able to say was, Ashi, fight, on repeat? Because he was just going to use the schlockiest line of them all in the end anyway? If your dude tells you he loves you, you don't even have to try resisting against the evil that overpowered you earlier. Like, come on, it's so bad. How can anyone watch this without their eyes rolling into the back of their head? I actually predicted Ashi opening up a time portal in my review of the last episode. If Ashi is part of Aku, if she does regain some control, could she actually be the one to open a time portal for Jack? And yet, I'm completely unsatisfied with the rushed and haphazard manner this was all carried out in. I know Aku was already in a weakened state, but I really expected something more visually interesting from Jack taking him out. At this point, I'll admit that maybe all my disappointment from before served to stifle the scene further, but it still lacked that oomph. It lacked the proper weight and gravitas. From an action perspective, this episode ranks as the lowest one of the entire 5th season for me. Then Jack and Ashi are inside the tower, and the next second outside the tower as it explodes. I laughed at how dumb the storyboarding was, just rushed to the absolute maximum. And I laughed again at this scene. It's just such bad presentation, and such bad script writing. It's just bad.
I felt him leave me.
So maybe you should disappear now? No, on the wedding day instead, for cheap narrative reason? Okay, yeah, whatever, just keep throwing on the bullshit.
Oh no! If Marge marries Artie, I'll never be born.
Before I discuss her disappearing though, Jack's parents. What the fuck at Jack's parents? We saw his mother before Jack went to fight Aku in the first episode. She was really old and had gray hair. Now we have the version of the mother Jack had when he was still an 8-year-old boy. Same for his father. We saw him after years of working as a slave for Aku. This should not be what Jack's parents look like if Jack returned to the past right after the events of the first episode. Was nobody paying attention? I mean, what the hell? How could an oversight like this not be caught? So yeah, back to Ashi. She disappears, and we get a cheap replica of the ending of Gurren Lagann. I legitimately wondered if the next scene would have Jack as a hobo, because why not at this point? Why not? Ashi becomes even more of a plot device in the narrative with this scene, and my personal biggest issue with this scene is Jack's surprise at Ashi's words.
Without a coup, I would have never existed.
No.
Are you for real, Jack? Do you mean to tell me that for decades you've sought to return to the past and destroy the evil that is Aku without realizing that the entire world and all the people that inhabit it would cease to exist if you do so? That thought never once crossed your mind until your betrothed disappeared in your arms? What? It's one thing to not explore the theme of whether Jack should erase all the people that exist in the time he inhabited throughout the series.
I guess I'm a special person, and I am worthy of respect.
But apparently, Jack wasn't even aware of the circumstances at play. Wow. God damn it. The series ends with Jack being cheered up by a ladybug. I assume by thinking about his adventures and all the people he met, who now only exist in his head, and the plot device he fell in love with, and how this plot device allowed for peace in the current time and helped Jack grow as a person. There's some real cheese here. I gave praise to the ladybug in episode 96, and commented how a lot of other media ends up feeling cheesy when it tries moves like this. This is the sort of cheese I was referring to. If this is the finale we get, you know what? I'd rather have had nothing. I saw that a lot of people really didn't want an open-ended conclusion to the show, but I feel like practically anything would have been better than this. I hated this episode.
Watch out.